welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Lesson Book Level 1. Today's video is Lesson 32, covering page 37 in our book, the damper pedal and harp song. So this lesson is an important lesson because we are learning about one of the coolest features about the piano, the damper pedal. It's one of the reasons I love the piano as an instrument, because of the nice effect that the pedal has on the overall sound when it's used properly. The damper pedal is also called the sustain pedal. It is the rightmost pedal of all three or all two pedals, depending on what kind of piano you have. If you have a keyboard and have one pedal, that is also the damper pedal. Sometimes it's referred to as the sustain pedal because when your foot is down on that pedal and you play a series of notes, it sustains the sound. I think it's also called the damper pedal because normally when the pedal is not in use, there's something inside the piano that dampens the string. So when I release my finger, the string is no longer vibrating, which ends the sound. But if the pedal is down and I release my fingers, the damper is not in place, so the vibration on the strings continue. So again, some pianos have 3 pedals, some have 2. The damper pedal is the one on the far right. If you have a keyboard and you do not have a pedal, you're going to need to invest in one because again, the pedal is essential to the piano. Fortunately for the keyboard, you can get a really good pedal for maybe around 30 bucks. If you are buying a new pedal, I would recommend getting one that looks like the pedal on an actual piano. Some keyboards have pedals that are like little square plastic boxes. They're usually black and they're okay, they work, but ultimately you're much better off if your pedal looks more like the actual pedals from a piano. Because it'll also react and operate like one from an actual piano. So I think they're usually around $30, and I'll put some links in the description below, set you up with some links to some decent pedals for the keyboard. All right, so let's learn more about the damper pedal. So like we said, it is the pedal on the far right. You're always going to use the right foot on the damper pedal. Think of it like driving a car. You always use your right foot on the accelerator. So you'll never use your left foot on the damper pedal. Always keep your heel on the floor. When you use the pedal, you're going to use your ankle like a hinge. So just small movements up and down. If you're on a grand piano, it may feel very stiff. So the movements might require a little more pressure. But usually on a keyboard and an upright piano like this one, small movements is all you need. If your heel is on the floor and if your foot isn't all the way up on the pedal or too close to the edge. If you're up, you don't get as much reaction or as much control. If you're near the edge, you can slip right off. So you want to be about halfway. As far as shoes, most shoes will be fine. I have loafers right now. Those are great. Bare feet, socks work fine too. Don't use flip-flops. Don't use heavy weighted, steel toe boots. Obviously don't use cleats. But most shoes are going to be fine. Tennis shoes are fine. Walking shoes, those are all fine as well. Okay, so go ahead and grab your pedal with your right foot. Go ahead and hold it down and play any key or a series of keys or a chord, anything on the piano. When you lift your finger off the note but keep your foot engaged on the pedal, listen to that sound. And it will hang around for quite a while. Eventually it fades away. Or if you release your foot, the sound is gone. And if you hold down the foot and play a series of notes, you can hear how all the notes are blended together. Sometimes that can be a nice sound, but depending on the notes, it could be very unpleasant. So we do have to use the pedal carefully. Which brings me to my next point today, that this page is just kind of introducing the pedal. This really isn't the proper way to pedal just yet. Later on in the book, there's a technique called overlapping pedal. And that's basically the form of pedaling you're going to use on almost every piece of music from here on out. You're not doing overlapping pedaling just yet. So what you're learning today in Harp Song in just a moment kind of just introduces the pedal, introduces the basic movements. But just recognize that this is not the final result. This is just introductory. If we went ahead and taught you overlapping pedal, it'd be great that you'd learn everything and here in this one lesson, but at the same time, it's a bit overwhelming with the amount of coordination involved. So for those of you who maybe already know a little bit about pedaling or any teachers that are watching, later on we will get to the actual overlapping pedaling. This is just basics right now, so this is not the final result. When you look up at on page 37 at the pink box, right underneath it, there's the sign for pedaling. Basically looks like an upside down bracket. Where the sign begins, it says pedal down. So obviously your foot will go down whenever you see that symbol. When you follow the horizontal line to the right, along with the music, you're going to keep holding the pedal. When the line comes up, when the bracket ends, the pedal comes up. And then usually you're going to see another bracket with the pedal down, so your foot will go back down. In Harp Song, notice that the bracket is underneath the bass clef. This is always the case, and probably because the bass clef often, not always, but often dictates the use of pedaling in a piece of music. A good rule of thumb is you pedal throughout the harmonic changes. That's when you pedal. What does that mean? Chord changes is basically the way of putting it. So if you look at Harp Song, the very beginning, remember our chord symbols at the top, above the treble clef, there is a G. So the entire first line is built off of the G chord. It's all broken G chords, which we'll get to in a second. The second line goes to a D7 chord. So look at the end of the first line. We said the end of the first line is the end of the G chord, right? The pedal comes up. On the second line, different chord, D7 chord. The pedal goes back down. Third line, you go back down after releasing at the end of the second line. Because at the end of the second line, you're finishing up D7. Third line, new chord, back to G. So wherever that you see a chord change in the music, whether the chord symbols are written in or it's just notation, most likely that's where you're going to see the pedal change. Now, why is that? If you hold the pedal down too long, if I hold it down on the same chord, a G chord, I'm just going to keep playing a broken G chord here. I could do this all day long. And no matter how many times I play it and keep the pedal down, it's going to sound great. But when I go back and forth between G and D7, you hear that sound? It's starting to get a little muddy. It's kind of like mush. So that's why you need to pedal between the chord changes. So you hear how that works? It's a little bit cleaner. Now again, there's a little bit of break in the sound. Just a heads up, overlapping pedal. Someday when we get to that, we'll take away that little break. So don't worry about that today. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So before you add pedal to Harp Song, you want to look at the notes first. So you'll get to the point someday you learn pedal so well you can do it without thinking about it. And when you learn a new piece of music, you can apply the pedal at the same time. But right now I like to take it a step at a time. And the final step will be adding the pedal. So first at Harp Song, we're just going to look at the notes. So it starts in the G position for both hands. And we already said that the entire first line is built off the G chord. More specifically, the G broken chord. So in the first measure, that's G in the left hand, followed by B, and followed by D. 3 beats per measure. Each one of those notes is a quarter note. 1, 2, 3. The second measure, the right hand does it. G, B, and D. Again, quarter notes. Third measure, back to the left hand. And the fourth measure, the right hand does it. So let's play the entire line straight through. Also notice the slurs, so you want to play it very smoothly. The piece is moderately slow, so we don't have to go fast. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So get comfortable with that before you move on to the second line, which is our D7 chord, broken D7 chord. In the last couple lessons, we were talking about how on the D7 chords, you have a black key, the F sharps. So when you play your G chord, even though it's broken in the previous measure, you don't want to be down here on the keys. You want to be up here, closer to the black keys. So that at the end of the first line, when I go to the second line, my pinky's right there in the left hand for my F sharp. So the first measure, second line, in the left hand is F sharp, C, and D. Broken D7 chord. In the right hand, the same thing. F sharp, C, and D. Back to the left hand, and back to the right hand. Third line is just like the first line, broken G chord, the exact same way we played it in the first line. And then finally on the fourth line, we're back to our D7 chord in the left hand, in the right hand, but only for 2 measures. In the third measure, the G chord in the left hand, and then the last measure is just a G dotted half note for 3 counts in the right hand. So that last line, be careful. That G chord sneaks up on us on measure 3. The previous 3 lines didn't had the same chord for the entire line. So just be careful when you get down there that doesn't sneak up on you. Before we talk about pedaling, let's go through and play the entire piece from the very beginning. All right, I'll give us a little count off. We'll go nice and slow. 1, 2, 3. And the piece does repeat. And when you repeat, you have a dynamic contrast. The first time through it was mezzo forte. You can see it written there in the very beginning, first measure. The second time through will be piano. So a nice dynamic contrast there for variety. So once you get comfortable with the notes and the steady beat, then we can add the pedaling. So remember, at the end of each line, you're going to lift the pedal. The exception being the fourth line, where you're going to lift the pedal at the end of the second measure. So when you lift your foot at the end of each line, you got to make sure it goes back down with the first note on the next line. If it goes down after the first note, then it's too late. You've lost that note. In other words, if my foot's down and I'm going to the second line, or excuse me, if my foot's up and I go to the second line and hit F sharp, and then when I go to hit C, if my foot goes down then, it's too late. My F sharp is not in the sound. I've lost it. So the whole point is so that F sharp, that first note, can sustain essentially throughout the entire second line. So let's go through it slowly. And what you can do at the very beginning is already have your foot down. Nothing wrong with having it down before you even play the first note. So our foot's down and we're going to start at the beginning. Just play nice and slow all the way to the end of the line. All right, so let's go a little bit slower here at the end of the line. So after this D, lift your foot, and as you go to the F sharp in the left hand on line 2, go down with your foot. And keep your foot down as you keep playing line 2. At the end of line 2, you can take your time here. After the D, lift your foot. Listen for the silence. Make sure there's a clean break, and then back down on the third line. Same time you hit the note, go down with your foot. And then just continue to the end of the third line. We'll do the same thing here at the end of the third line. Hit your last note and then come up and then down on the fourth line. Now be very careful here. Let's slow down at the end of the second measure because we're going to lift after this D, lift, and then down on the G. And keep your foot down to the end of the piece. So you see what I'm doing now. Even though we've gone through, learned the notes, learned to play it at 3/4 time, nice and steady, I'm encouraging you, when you place the pedaling, to slow down. So you're going to disrupt that steady rhythm. That's okay. I mean, you got to do it at first. You got to work on the coordination of lifting that foot at the end of each line and then putting it back down at the beginning of the next line. So don't be afraid if there's a big gap of silence, if you take a lot of time. Take the time and do it right. You're probably going to have to do it over and over and over. And what you could do is just focus on the last measure of each line going into the first measure. There's really no need to play the entire line all the way through. Just focus on the transition. So, for example, the last measure of the first line, my foot's down. I'm going to play the last measure in the right hand and then focus on going to the first measure in the second line. So foot up and then back down. And that's it, and then stop. So you can just focus on the transition instead of using up time playing measures 1, 2, and 3, which you already know, and which the foot's already going to be down. So working on the transitions is the best use of time. And probably your hardest spot's going to be the fourth line. Again, we're not used to pedaling in this song right in the middle of a line. As you get more and more comfortable with it, try to set yourself a goal. Say, okay, now I'm going to go really steady tempo. Again, maybe don't start at the beginning of the line. Start in the last measure of the first line and give yourself a very slow count off. See if you can do the transition without putting the gap in anymore. Keep the beat going. Let me give you an example. So I'll count off and then I'm going to play the last measure of the top line. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And you can see even at that slow tempo, it's a relatively quick movement with the pedal up and back down. When we go even faster, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You see it's just a quick up, down, up, down. But you got to build it up. You got to start slow and work it up as you get faster and faster. Then you can put in the steady beat. Let's see, last thing you can do at the bottom of the page, it says also play the harp song in the following ways. Play the third and fourth measures of each line 1 octave higher than written. So the first 2 measures of the first line are right there as written, like you normally been playing them. The third measure, the left hand, they want it to go up an octave. It's written right here. 1 octave higher is actually where your right hand just played. So after your right hand plays right there on measure 2, your left hand's going to come over, kind of create like a little loop, little rainbow actually. Just kind of bring that left hand over, slide your right hand out, and play it with your left hand. And then your right hand comes up here, 1 octave higher than where it was written. So let's put all that together from the beginning. And of course, still pedaling the same. So that might be fun to try just for some variety and to explore some additional octaves on the piano. So the second line would be the same thing. D7 chord, but the exact same pattern. First 2 measures as written. But in third measure, my left hand comes over and plays what my right hand played. And then my right hand's up here. Now notice, this may take some practice, but notice I didn't move my hands in the last minute. So here I am at the beginning of the line. My left hand's already in the process of moving. And while my left hand's playing, my right hand is already moving. So it's not this. I'm just so used to moving it. But you see what I'm saying? You don't want to wait to the last minute to move. And the pedal is really great because with the pedal down, you can release your left hand and the sound continues. So that's one thing I love about the pedal is it will hold down the keys and you can already set yourself up for wherever you're going. So that's kind of neat. The other option here is play the first and second measures of each line 1 octave lower than written. So again, if we're here, 1 octave lower in the left hand, here's my G as written, I'm going to go down here. In my right hand, here's where I am, 1 octave would take me here. So it would be down here. Now the third measure is as written, and that's the left hand playing it right where the right hand just played. And then my right hand comes up and over for measure 4 where it's normally written. So that's the other option. The first 2 lines, first 2 measures of every line play the notes down an octave. So again, this gives you a great opportunity to explore some more range on the keyboard and a good sensation, a good use of, a good idea of how the pedal works when the hands leave the keyboard and the sound can continue thanks to the pedal. So that's one of the reasons I really love the pedal, because it can almost cheat for you in a way. So that's basically it for this lesson. So obviously the big takeaway here is the damper pedal, learning how to just get comfortable with it. Again, what you're learning today isn't going to be the final goal. This is just an introduction. Eventually, overlapping pedaling will create something very interesting. It creates a consistently smooth sound throughout the song, but at the same time, it breaks the music so it doesn't get overly muddy. So it does 2 things at once. It breaks it, but it doesn't break it. I know that sounds a little interesting. Well, it is interesting, and it's really cool. But again, that's not till later in the book. So for now, feel free to just, lift that foot up, take a little break, put it back down. And then again, eventually get to the point where you can do that with a steady beat. But if you have little breaks in the sound, that's okay for now. All right, I wish you all the best as you work on the damper pedal and harp song, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.